All right, everyone, we are back with our How to Get Started series. And I would just say, for context, this is part two. You probably read that and said, oh, I wonder where part one is. It's actually episode 257. You can just look one episode above this in your podcast player of choice, or you could go to choosefi.com/257. And let me give you a little context, though. Brad is part of a mastermind, Dominic Cortuccio's mastermind. And in this, he is given the opportunity to share a talk about a topic of his choice. Can anybody take a guess what he decided to talk about? He talks about financial independence, and several individuals on this mastermind said, oh, wow, I need that in my life. How do I get started? And Brad, even though we're almost 400 episodes in, maybe over 400 at this point, even though talks about this every single week, and even though he is incredibly confident on the why of this, suddenly said, I didn't feel like I had exactly what they needed. I told them I was able to give them the action steps, but I worried that maybe it sounded like platitudes, and they need to understand that, no, it's this. It isn't really this important. So I wish I had longer to unpack that. And he brought that idea to me and said, Jonathan, what if we just do that on the show? Because I, as someone that does this podcast twice a week, am struggling to share that with my mastermind. Maybe the community is struggling to share. Once we get past the why, once we get to that family member, that friend that says, yes, but tell me how, maybe they are struggling with the same conversation. So that is the context, the How to Get Started series, part two. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, we're back. And to help me with this, I have my co-host, Brad, here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, you set that up perfectly, right? So this is a concept that obviously we are well-versed in talking about. And I think genuinely so much of it does come down to that why of FI, understanding why you want to pursue financial independence, what your life might look like when you've reached financial independence, and frankly, when you're just on the journey. That this is not about deprivation at all. It's not about living a life that is lacking anything, but the opposite. It's you're striving towards this life of absolute abundance in every possible way: relationships, time, health, obviously wealth. It's about abundance. But so much of this does come down to that personal, right? The why. And like we mentioned, I was talking to this mastermind group, and a lot of the people were looking maybe for that one silver bullet answer of, oh, if I sold my car, am I going to reach financial independence? Like, is it one move? Tell me that one thing. And it's really not that. It's a path. And again, I believe it starts with that why. But once you're on board, you need to know the how of FI. What do you do? And I think that's what we're doing with this series here.
I think when we talk about how to get started. If you go back to episode 257, we're not going to rehash it, but just to kind of catch you up and add some emphasis for why you should go listen to it. We start with your why, and then at a little more granular level, your goals, the path that you think you're on right now, and what options you would like in maybe a relatively short period of time. And we don't use your age as much as like a time frame, like 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Not what do you have to do, but what would you like the option to do over this period of time? So once you build on that, then we said, all right, now let's take a look at where you are right now. And we immediately started working through your expenses. We established that there's a difference between your bills and then the things that you have to pay for on a recurring basis, and then discretionary spending. And then by going through this thought exercise, we started to identify lifestyle creep. And then we just kind of walked away there. Now, we used kind of, at least to start, and we didn't really stay strong on this, but to start, we kind of used Brad back in 2007, 2008 as kind of a place to kind of pull some of these from. And then we quickly moved increasingly to this hypothetical individual and different types of bills and recurring expenses that they might have. And it was a really useful thought exercise. So start there. But we kind of came to the end of the episode knowing that we were going to be coming back to this and said, let's just pick that up directly. And I think once we know that, once we have a pretty good sense of what your outflow is, then it's time to figure out what to do with it. So we came up with this number. This individual was spending around $6,700 a month. They were shocked by this. They actually thought it was closer to $4,000 a month when they started. But it turns out, based on their actual spending patterns, this actual person, actual quote unquote, was spending $6,700 a month. And so one thing we said is really important is we're doing this from a place of no judgment. But what we've done is we've taken data and we turned it into information. Data is largely useless by itself. It's only once you turn it to information that your actions can be informed based on that. And so here is where we are now. Forget what made it up, Now we know our life cost on average $6,700 a month. What do you think is the next step?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just taking one quick step back and saying, like you said about the data, right? It's just so important to have this information. I think so many of us are fearful of thinking about our personal finances. We're afraid what we're going to find. We're going to see all those mistakes we've made, quote unquote mistakes, right? Which is just life, right? We're all just trying to live the best lives we can. So I think the critical piece here, just psychologically, is you have to be honest with yourself and you can't beat yourself up for past mistakes or whatever you want to call them. I've done terribly calamitous things in my financial life that I've come to peace with and I've moved forward. Right. And Jonathan, I'm sure you've done the same, right? Graduate school and $168,000 of student loan debts comes to mind, but it wasn't a bad decision at the time, right? It's just, okay, would you have made a more optimized decision now with the information you have? Yes, obviously. But you're not going to beat yourself up for a decision that you made, right? You're going to move forward. And again, it's that honesty. I think just putting it on paper or digital paper as it may be, it's just so critical to just have that point and say, all right, here's where I am today, mistakes and all, and here's how I'm going to move forward. So move forward we will, right?
That's right. Let's move forward. All right, so that's still, I'm going to put it back on you. What do we do next? We know what our life cost, $6,700 a month. What do we do with that information?
So yeah, I guess for this person, this hypothetical me, I guess, right? We're at $6,700 per month in expenses. And to get our starting point, to move forward on what our financial independence number, our FI number is on the current trajectory, we need to get the annual expenses. All right. So really simple. You take that $6,700 per month and just multiply by 12, right? 12 months in a year. And you get, let's just round for simplicity's sake, you get $80,000 per year in expenses. Okay. Nice round number. That includes everything. All right. That includes all those one-time expenses. That includes life is lumpy and things come up. It includes travel, right? It's everything. Those are your anticipated expenses. And of course, things come and go. 1 year is going to be less, 1 year is going to be more. But as of right now, that's our best estimate for what the annual expenses are. So how we in the financial independence look at our FI number, right? And this is the amount of assets that you need to reach financial independence. Now, you often hear, oh, to reach retirement. You hear this in the traditional media. You hear people like Susie Orman spouting off absurd numbers just off the top of their head. You need $10, $15 million to retire at all. They're just made up numbers. Whereas what we do in the FI community is we look at those expenses because that's what you need to cover each and every year. You need the assets or income, but in most cases, the assets to be able to cover that amount of expense per year, right? You don't need to replace your current income. You don't need $10 million to retire to a private island like Susie, right? Like none of this stuff. You just need to cover your expenses.
I mean, let's be realistic. If you want a private island, Susie's not wrong.
Yeah, she's not wrong. I strongly suspect you do need the 10
If you're willing to share it with a couple other people occasionally, you could probably bring that down significantly, like crazy down. But if it's just your island, Susie's not wrong.
Let's put aside the private island here and just talk kind of reality for us normal people, right? So what we do, again, we start with these expenses. So there's something known as the 4% rule, or as we like to call it, the 4% rule of thumb. because this is not a rule as it suggests. This is a rough rule of thumb that gets you your financial independence figure. Okay. So as it stands, the 4% suggests that you can withdraw 4% of your total assets each year and use that money, spend that money to live on, right? And this is actually adjusted for inflation. So let's say, for argument's sake, you had $1 million. That's your total net worth. And you pulled out 4% of that, which is $40,000. It doesn't stay at that $40,000 for the next 70 years, because as we know, inflation would erode that. And 50, 70 years down the road, that's going to be worth pennies. And that's clearly not what we're aspiring to. So this is adjusted for inflation, but it just gives you that general sense that you can pull out about 4% from that total net worth each year, and you can use that to live on. So that's why we look at the expenses, because it starts with expenses, right? So the obvious other side of that math is just very simply, if you said, hey, I've got $40,000 of expenses, to get to that number, to get to that fine number, I just have to multiply by 25, okay? So 40,000 multiplied by 25 gets us to that same $1 million. And again, the other side of the math is the $1 million, 4% of that is the 40,000. So that's why we start with expenses. And now in our hypothetical here, Jonathan, we have this person who spends $80,000 a year, right? So you take the 80,000 and you multiply by 25 and you get to exactly $2 million. So this is the fine number for that person who has $80,000 a year of expenses. It's $2 million.
And so for someone that's going back and just trying to do that math, what you did is you took 6,700, which is monthly expenses, and you multiplied that times 12 to come up with annual expenses, which was just about $80,000 or $80,400. But if it were just 80,000, I have the benefit of an Excel sheet in front of me here, so don't hold it against me. 80,400. If you were to multiply that times 25, it is $2,010,000, or as Brad, you said, 2 million exactly. Basically, it's $2 million is what you need. Now, this is not the end of the conversation. If the person has a net worth of zero, it's not, oh, wow, I need $2 million. Like, there's so much more to this. This is not where the conversation stops. It's just, this is probably one of the first things I run. The next piece is charting out current trajectory to that number. And then from there, take a look at that, compare that to what goals they said they had at the beginning of the conversation. And then we can then add on the next layer, which is scenario planning, right? What are we willing to do? What do we want to do? What is the obvious thing to do? And that's kind of how we work through this. So the next thing we're going to go through is, we know how much their life cost. And we know theoretically, based on no net worth, well, it doesn't even matter, net worth or no net worth, but no additional sources of income. If they had this amount in their investment accounts, they could replace, that's what the fine number is saying. This amount in your investment account, so $2 million in your investment accounts, earning and growing over time, would likely be able to provide for you enough money to live off of for the next 20, 30 years, really probably likely for the rest of your life, and still have a pretty significant chunk of change, maybe even capital preservation in some optimistic scenarios, when you pass away. So you'd have a pretty significant chunk of change to pass to your heirs or to a charity and institution of your choice. That's the power of financial independence. The goal here. So I was talking to someone, I was having the same conversation as you, Brad. They know that I'm working with Choose FI, and they know that I'm interested in finance, and you have these types of questions. And they said, yeah, I don't think I could do FI because I just like to spend money. And I was like, well, we have that in common. I like to spend money too, but there's a slight difference. What I want to do right now, when you spend money, you work, you put your time in, and you earn some amount of dollars for that time, and then you have some amount of money to spend. My goal is to add an extra little piece in between there. I want to work, time for money. I want to use that money that I'm earning to build an investment portfolio that can then earn money for me. And then the money that it earns for me, I'm going to spend that to the degree that I'm able without running down the investment. It's not that I don't like to spend. It's just that I hate the idea of having to commit the rest of my life in order to be able to continue to do that spending. There's an extra piece here. How can I separate my time from my money? How can I create truly passive income? And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And it's so important to reframe that savings, right? So many, and I feel like there's just been such a disservice done to people about the only point of saving money is for some far off retirement, right? Like This is what you hear often in the popular culture in the media. It's, oh, save for retirement, save for retirement, save for retirement, right? You never hear save for your life, save to reclaim decades of your life, save so you can spend your time as you see fit, right? Like, this is why you want to create that gap. You love spending, Jonathan,
I'm
right?
so
Like,
good at
you
it. I'm
absolutely,
great at it.
you are
Is this
fantastic
a
at
life
it, in
skill I
fact.
was born with? Am I just uniquely gifted at this? I'm so good at it.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But you've now taken it as, hey, part of my quote unquote spending is actually spending on the ultimate freedom, right? The ultimate luxury, which is my time. So it's just reframing, right?
That's exactly it. All right, that truck that I've always wanted, I'll see you in 5 years. When my investment portfolio is enough to just cover the cost of that. Like it's delayed gratification, so I can have so much more gratification, and something that's actually, as opposed to just buyer's remorse. It's the stuff you want, but you've already moved all past all the stuff that you have that's filling up your garage and your basement, et cetera, because you have no time to use it. That's always just, let me purchase something else. No, I'm gonna invest in something that gives me more time. I'm going to invest in my time. That's what we're talking about here. So everyone requires this rearrange. Once they see it, the game gets real, right? It's like, oh, I know the board game now. I understand the rules. That's why I think we like board games so much, Brad. There's a piece of this that you see replicated in real life. There's certain things that you can do, and they're power plays. And if you do them consistently over time, you get more and more chances for luck to strike, more and more opportunities. And when you have no time, when you're paycheck to paycheck persistently, because the good news is you can afford all the payments, you're limiting the ability for opportunity and luck to strike.
Yeah, Jonathan, I wonder, that probably is why we love board games so much. I think there's something to that, right? It's seeing the iterations of this, it's making better decisions just little by little over the long term, the gamification aspects. Yeah, I mean, that's a cool observation. I like that.
I was thinking about it. I'm not a huge, Settlers of Catan is not my favorite game. I know that's blasphemy in your household. Like, I just have been beaten by Laura too many times to love the game. She sees the Matrix. Anyways, if you want to break it down to a board game, like game theory here, with a board game, it's very easy just to take the cheapest resources and spend them all immediately to get a quick win, to get some quick points. But if you want to break the game, if you want to win the game, you got to look a little bit farther down the road, right? It's an intermediate play that usually if you're going for the long shot, you're going to win occasionally, but not enough to be a consistent winner. That one, it might work 1 out of 100, 1 out of 200. The people that win the most, they have an intermediate mindset. And so it's actually, if you think about it's the same idea. This isn't get rich quick on a hope or a prayer, down the road. And it's also not, you got to spend money to make money. It's kind of, let's have an intermediate mindset. Let's understand what we're doing, and let's replicate this process to give ourselves as much of a chance to beat the game as possible. And that's what we're talking about. These are the tried and true steps. These aren't the get rich quick steps, but they are get rich quick-ish, and they work the highest percentage of the time, basically every time, if you understand the limitations and what obstacles you have to actually work through.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, long-term thinking is critical here in the FI community, unquestionably. And yeah, let's get into, I guess, the next most important part of this, right? Which is looking at your income, right? And I guess in this case, we're going to just start with, what is the bare minimum income this person could earn to cover these expenses, right? This is with no savings. This is just barely scraping by at zero, essentially. They make this money, they pay their taxes, they've got $80,000 left, and that's what they spend each year in expenses. And they're at zero, kind of paycheck to paycheck.
Actually, I wanted to point out to you, even what you said right there is perfect. They feel like they're barely scraping by. They have nothing to show for it. But look at how much they actually have to make in order to be able to have the take-home pay that we just described, to be able to spend all of that paycheck, which, by the way, I believe is a very common scenario. So go ahead, but I just think it was worth highlighting that you use the words barely scraping by, and I bet you they feel that. Like, all our hard work, this is what we have to show for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I bet they're also using language like, wow, we make this much money, and yet we're barely scraping by. We have nothing saved. If an emergency comes up, even a small one, what do? We have to use credit cards, right? Like, we shouldn't have succeeded this much at life and be in this precarious situation. These are common laments of the middle class, right? It's just, like you said, this is probably a normal thing that you hear all across the country. So Jonathan, you actually turned me on to this really great site called smartasset.com. And they have this wonderful tax calculator. So we actually just kind of backed into this. So really, really simple. We were looking to get what would get us to the take home pay of about $80,000, assuming that this person did nothing else. They didn't put into their 401k, so their contribution zero there. There's nothing extra. It's just really simple. Here's the household income. What does the tax get down to get us to that take home pay of about 80,000?
So this would be and it's a married couple, right?
Yep. It's married filing joint. We put in, and we also put our local location here in Richmond, Virginia, and it looks like $102,000 of household income is required to get that take home pay of about 80,000. So how that works out, it looks like their federal income tax, they pay about $9,000 in taxes. This is all based on 2019 numbers, but this is, almost identical for 2020. So their effective tax rate is pretty low, frankly. It's 8.75% on 6 figures of income. So that's about $9,000 of federal tax. The state tax for Virginia would be about $5,000. And then basically the real unavoidable is the FICA, the Social Security. That comes out to 7.65% of that. So it's about a little less than $8,000. So all told, between federal and state income tax, and then the FICA, the Social Security portion, the taxes are a little less than $22,000, which gets us down to that take-home pay of $80,000. So these people are just breaking even at this income of $102,000. And Jonathan, like we said, this is unoptimized. This is not doing anything FI related. This is not maxing out pre-tax buckets like 401ks and IRAs and HSAs, all these things that we can talk about and will certainly in this series. But this is the starting point.
I actually specifically, because I haven't found anything better than this. This is the actual tax calculator I use when I'm doing these types of just projection This is not, I'm not working with an accountant. We're not filing taxes at this point. We're just coming up with a basic FI plan. I will have the link in the show notes, smartasset.com/taxes/income-taxes. And then you can put in your locality. What makes this particular calculator so appealing is that it actually includes your local taxes based around your zip code in there. That's something that TurboTax just simply doesn't do for you when you use their tax projector, their W-4 tax projector. So this is just a phenomenal planning tool. And it's going to solve the other half of this equation for us. So we just, they would be able to tell us what their income is, their annual income, et cetera, or we could reverse engineer it and see if we're getting close. But either way, you get this little information. Are you contributing to a 401k, et cetera, et cetera? And then we're able to kind of reverse engineer it down into what they're actually bringing home and see how it lines up. And specifically there, the difference. I mean, Brad, what stood out to me, assuming that this was it, that they made 102. So they make this couple between the two of them. So that could be a $50,000 income and a $60,000 income. It could be an $80,000 income, or, it could be a part-time side hustle on the one end and one primary breadwinner. But in a dual income family, there's multiple ways that you could see, you having these types of numbers to be working with. And they are making 6 figures. They are paycheck to paycheck. And now we have it. It's there in front of us. We understand why they feel stuck. We understand why they feel like 5 years from now, based on current patterns, they're going to have nothing to show for it. Absolutely nothing to show for it. So this goal they had of having more options, or maybe someone being at home with the kids part-time, right now it's unrealistic based on if they were to continue current course. Wow. It's important to see that. It's not fun to see that. You'd like to know that, hey, I'm already doing everything unintentionally great. I accidentally fell into financial independence. Some people have that story. Oh, great. What can I learn from you? They can't learn anything from that story, but we can all learn from there. So now we know that, okay, now it's time to run this calculation. Brad, how long would it, this would probably be an interesting point. If we know their income and we know their expenses and they're 1-to-1, what is their estimated retirement date?
Infinity, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Never.
It's not good. No, but you would even then, you would probably say, is there anything else, right? Is there Social Security? Is there any investment portfolio, anything outside of your net worth, like a rental house that you have? You would want to start looking at those sorts of things. Now, we have a part 3 for this conversation where we're going to basically look at net worth, and we're going to look at really this choose your own adventure approach and all these different levers. But I think it's important to see, just kind of map out from where we are right now, just kind of give a little teaser reel of the information we have now, what levers we can actually pull. So we see their paycheck to paycheck, but that's not enough. Is this actually what their life is going to cost in perpetuity. And we want to see, is there any way that we could create a little space? We know they're not putting in anything into their 401k. Every dollar that we bring home is being taxed at our marginal tax rate. And so we go back to their expenses and we're like, all right, is everything here steady state or is anything going to move? Oh, yeah. Well, it turns out I'm on my last payment on the last thing of stuff that I bought. And our 2 cars actually will be paid off this fall, coming to the end of our 5-year payments on both of them that we got when we graduated college. And so it looks like just between the car payments, we're going to be able to, this fall, we're going to be able to free up at least $800 a month. And then we work through a couple other items. And pretty handily, you guys remember back in 257, there was a lot of slush in there. Pretty handily, by focusing on a few other things, some cell phones, maybe the groceries, a couple other line items, we're able to make that 800 look a lot more like $1,000. We're able to, as a result of this conversation, recognize we could be freeing up $1,000. Now, in a vacuum, without this conversation, they just probably run right back into payments. This money's gone. It doesn't have any guidance, so it just gets spent. But now, in light of this conversation, they're saying, oh, all right, well, let's say I could make these changes and free up $1,000 a month. How does that change the calculus? Because right now I can never retire.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? So I was kind of flippantly saying infinity, but it's not too far off based on a 0 savings rate. Sure, like you said, there's Social Security, there's some other things, et cetera, et cetera. But realistically, that couple is not going to be able to get to retirement ever. So now, in this scenario, these car payments, they're gone. Like you said, just a couple tiny little optimizations. And certainly in part 3, we're going to talk about more significant changes, but just tiny little things. They've cut $1,000, right? So the cars are the vast majority of it, a couple other little things. So their $6,700 per month in expenses just now went down to $5,700 per month, right? So their annual expenses went from $80,400 down to $68,400. Now, if you remembered, what we did was we took those annual expenses and multiplied by 25, right? So the 80,400 was a FI number of 2,010,000, right? And now with that $1,000 reduction, their annual expenses are 68,400, and we multiply that by 25 to get 1.71 million. So $1,710,000 is now their new FI number, just by not having those car payments. They've cut off $300,000 in their FI number. Now, Jonathan, the cars are still the same 5-year-old car, right? Which are running perfectly, wonderful cars. They just didn't re-up for brand new cars with leases or a new loan on them. So that's it. Nothing else has changed in their life. There's no deprivation. This is just, hey, we're not going to roll this over and get new car payments. So 1.71 million is the new goal number. But as you like to say, but there's more, right? There's more here because now they have a gap. They have some savings, which is really, really cool. And that's where it gets fun.
Yeah. So what do we want to do with this gap? What do we want to do with the savings? Well, we got to look at what tools they're already taking advantage of. And we're going to do this in the next part of this series. So we're going to go even farther here, but just for the sake of us talking about how it actually changes the income side of their equation, we know they're not optimizing their 401k. They both work. They both have access to 401k. They have access to up to, $19,500 for each of them. So $39,000 in pre-tax retirement vehicles that they could be funding. In this case, they don't have $39,000 to put into those accounts, but they have something now. So we're going to take that $1,000 a month savings and we're going to go ahead and start putting that into the 401k in this hypothetical example, because that actually changes their bottom line, what they're actually bringing home. This is very interesting because when you pay yourself first, your money actually goes farther. Not only is it having the chance to work on your behalf to a number that's now smaller because you don't have as much expenses, but your money is actually earning money for you. So now your time for dollars, you no longer have to do all the heavy lifting. This $12,000 this year and the $12,000 next year. And then as we continue to optimize this, it's growing. It's tax advantaged. And I'll let Brad explain what that means. And it's now starting to make money for you. You're gamifying this thing. So Brad, tax advantage, what are the implications for them on this take-home pay calculator that we're looking at?
Yeah. So what's happening is they are putting this money, so this $1,000 that they've freed up, they're putting it into their 401k. That allows for a tax deduction in this current year. So we're recording this in 2020. So on this couple's 2020 federal income tax return, their $102,000 of household income does not get put on the income line. In essence, it's not going to be the 102. It's going to be the 102 minus the $12,000 that they've contributed to their 401ks. So it's a tax deduction in the current year. So that nets their household income out to 90,000, right? It's the 102 minus the 12 gets you to 90,000. And that's the number they're starting their tax return with. Okay. So this benefit is you're taking that $12,000, but that's not after tax money. This is pre-tax money. So you're not getting taxed on that in the current year. So there's an additional benefit to this, which is actually really cool. And Jonathan, it looks like you just plugged this into that smart asset. What are we looking at now?
Yeah, I'm trying to give them apples to apples here so we can compare before. Basically, before they were bringing home on the same salary, but now they've optimized and they're taking advantage of these tax advantage vehicles. Before they were bringing home about $80,000 a year, right? Now they've contributed, they've paid themselves first. They've taken $12,000 and they've contributed that to a 401k. And so you say, all right, well, now you have $12,000 less to spend, right? No. You actually will still be bringing home $70,000. So your actual take home only went down by $10,000, not the full 12. This is massive. That means that you saved $12,000, but in reality, by doing this, by making this decision now, you have an extra $2,000 to work with that before was just disappeared to taxes, right? And so we could say, oh, wow, well, our life, because we got rid of $1,000 a month in monthly expenses, which is $12,000 a year in, these recurring expenses that's just gone. And I actually now, because my income didn't go down as much as I thought, I actually have an extra $2,000 to play with. Great. Maybe we could dial it up a little bit further. Now it's not just $12,000 that you can contribute. You actually have a little bit of extra space because remember, their take-home pay, what they actually need to be able to pay all their bills. And this was not a deprivation. This was just based on what they're actually spending plus a pretty considerable amount of slush. Now that new number is $5,700 a month or $68,000 a year, but they're making $70,000. There's an extra $16,000, $18,000, $2,000 a year that they could likely be contributing on top of that because they made this optimization, actually getting their 401k contribution. Let's check this out. Let me see how much more I could pump that up. Let's see. Yeah, they could be putting $14,000 a year in their 401k without pinching into what they actually need to be able to pay their bills and live their life, right? That's the power of doing this. We want to figure out how we can, if you understand the rules of the game, you have this intermediate mindset. We want to lean on the tax treatment early on so our money can start earning money for us, knowing that we don't want the government to tax it now while it's still real expensive for us. The government's going to tax it if you want to use it to buy stuff. If you want to use it to build your financial independence fund, build financial freedom for yourself, get more and more options, they'll say, all right, we'll wait till later. And we'll talk about later. That's another conversation altogether. But it's amazing once you understand this, and then once you can gamify it in your mind, this gets really, really fun.
All right, Jonathan. So like you said, in part 3, we're going to talk really about optimizations, both on the income side and on the expense side. But this couple, they're just doing this one thing, right? They went from never being able to retire to, okay, we're just not going to re-up our car loans and we're going to save this money. Now, let's see what this looks like for them. So this went from a retirement of never, quite literally, to let's go to a compound interest calculator and just kind of figure out roughly when they're going to be able to retire just from this one thing. We determined, right, that their new FI number is about $1.7 million. So that's the 68,000 annual expenses times 25 gets the FI number that they're looking for. And we're saying they're starting with a net worth of zero, right? They had been living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have any debt, let's say, for argument's sake, but they don't have any assets. So they're just simply starting from zero. But now they have this $14,000 a year that they are saving in their 401ks. So that works out to an amount of $1,167. And actually, we have some calculators on apps.choosefi.com where it talks through compound growth, and there are different scenarios that you can game out, which is actually really, really cool. And I'm just very simply putting in that $1,167 of monthly contributions. And I'm trying to figure out with a return of 8%. And that's roughly what we use here at Choosefi to estimate like a long term. We're talking 3, 4, 5 decades or more. What we anticipate would be an expected return. Obviously, nobody can be sure of that. And there are up years and down years, et cetera, et cetera. But we think over a very long period of time, that's going to be a roughly accurate amount. So 8% is what I'm starting with. And I'm just trying to get, hey, when do they cross that threshold? When do they hit 1.7 million? And actually, it winds up that it's almost exactly 30 years. So this couple, just by making those couple little changes, right? The cars and then some minor things, they went from reaching retirement never to 30 years from now. And as we've deduced, they're pretty young. So, I mean, this is reasonable, right? They're looking at a retirement at maybe 60 years old, something like that, somewhere right in that vicinity, which is pretty darn good considering where they were just before finding this concept, before saying, hey, we don't have to spend every single dollar. So, I mean, Jonathan, that's pretty hopeful considering where this hypothetical couple was just, an hour ago when we were talking
I know, I was
about
thinking that same thing. Man, like 20 minutes ago, there was no hope they could never retire. Now
this.
they've unlocked a very replicable path. I mean, most people here, and let's think about this. You're like, well, shoot, I don't, my cars won't be paid off till next year. Fine. So it's 31 years. But the key is now that you have this information, not data anymore, but information, when you get to that inflection point, it's time to, your payment is gone. Do you feel compelled just to go get another one, another car payment because you missed your car payment? No. I mean, this is conservative, guys. Financial independence, we're going to keep dialing this up. The next part of this conversation, we're going to keep looking, but this is a starting place. Baseline right now, one tiny little input, focusing on the expenses without any other significant optimizations and just learning how your 401k works. You've now got a default lane to a 30 years to retirement, and you're good to go. Now we can ratchet it up and we're saying, what does it look like for 25? Again, go back to your goals, right? How do I get options at 5, at 10? Is it binary? How do I invest? Like, we're going to build on all this. It's all coming. It's all coming. Brad, I'm pretty happy. Like, your friends that had you introduce the YFI, now they listen to the how to get started. They followed up with the what is my FI number and how do I evaluate my income? Like, we're really building this content base for a new listener.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think your point there a minute ago was essential, which is, hey, what if my car payment doesn't come due for a year or 2 or 3? Or what if, right? People are always looking for that. You can take action. You can take action then, right? You can take action hopefully well before then. And we're gonna game that out. But like you said, it's about having the information. And I think so many of us lack direction when it comes to money. We lack any type of security or understanding. And now just having this concept, right? And we talked about a lot of math here. This is incredibly simple math, right? We're talking multiplying by 25 and multiplying by 12, right? But still, some people are averse to math, and I get it. And I promise you, once you've got this down, once you get this just bare understanding of, oh, wow, I get this. This makes sense. I know how to get my FI number. I understand, hey, I'm saving this amount. What if I saved a little bit more this month? How does that impact my number of years to when I get to FI? It becomes exciting. It doesn't become the drudgery of math. Like, this has nothing to do with math. I promise you, like, once you get beyond just this bare bones stuff, you're never going to think about the math again. You're not going to be bogged down in spreadsheets and boring stuff. Like, I'm a CPA and I even hate that kind of stuff. Like, I don't deal in spreadsheets anymore. Like, sure, I track some stuff, but like, Jonathan, like I always talk about, I spend about 10 minutes per month on my finances. And that is not an exaggeration. That's what it takes because it's on autopilot. And we will obviously get there as we build this series up. But I have to say, I mean, to me, I leave this conversation really hopeful for these people that they can have an already early retirement just from this tiny little thing. And it's just onward and upward from here.
Brad, I was thinking, do you think we could break down bits of these types of episodes and actually include them on our Get Started series at Choose FI? Like this how to use this calculator and how to run that very basic, how to go through that smart asset tutorial and how to do that Excel sheet. Like, I think people should know that if they go to choosefi.com/start or if they refer someone to choosefi.com/start, we're going to on-ramp them to this type of content.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, we are building out a whole email series that comes when you sign up at choosefi.com/start. So yeah, Jonathan, that is certainly added to the list, and we're going to make that happen ASAP.
All right, guys, you heard it. Spread the word. Share the idea of financial independence. Feel empowered to have these types of conversations. This is the conversation that your friends, family, coworker, they want to have. They just don't know yet. It's not even in their universe. So we need to be the one to prompt it and do it in a very non-judgmental way. And if that looks like you having it one-on-one, do that. If it looks like you just saying, hey, check out this episode and see if it sparks any interest, then do that. And then as a natural follow-up, go to choosefi.com/start. Get started on your path to financial independence today. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.